All right, guys, thank you for those updates. We'll get one more before we are done here for the day. Right now, we're going to welcome our next live guest. We've got Harris Lagan with us today, talking about what it's like on the rails right now. And this is a conversation we kind of had yesterday. President Biden deciding to step into rail negotiations and form this executive panel. Harris, thank you for joining us. And let's kind of start there with the way that things are going. What are your thoughts now on the decision to step in over negotiations from a presidential level?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Great to see everybody. Michael, I did just email your producer, and I really want to rename this segment to where Michael got it right or where it was wrong. Please remember there were a couple of months ago that we talked about this same topic, and I think there was a debate between you and I that indicated where I believe that labor had a strong leverage point and was going to lead to a likely, an issue later on down the road. That's where we're at. So when I think about what's actually going on, I never want to see more government intervention. I'm glad that we didn't wake up on Monday morning and find ourselves with a massive labor strike and a massive portion of our supply chain literally not operating. What I am happy about is that we've got an extension well into September 18th to figure this out. And my sense is that I think we will see a deal rather than an executive order forcing everybody to just continue as normal.
I really hope you're right. Right. So we got 61-day reprieve basically is what we got, or I guess, yeah, or it goes back to like Friday. So I think we lose like 2 days or something like that. But it doesn't matter. We got till September, and but I mean, a shutdown in the rail is like a lot worse than people might think it would be, right? I mean, you've got all this bulk cargo that would stop moving that doesn't necessarily just translate to, we'll just throw it on more trucks, right? Because you got truck capacity right now, theoretically. So let's just move it by truck. You can't just do that, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's correct. So in an already inflationary environment where fuel prices are already elevated and truck driver availability isn't exactly something that we're talking about or celebrating here in 2022, I think there's a real thought that would have been a massive blow to the industrial and kind of consumer economies. Because if you think about it, the pressure relief valve for many of the ports, which hasn't been available here in Southern California recently, has been a direct take it from the port, put it on the rail, get it out of the local environment and send it into the hinterland. Conversely, on that same point, there's not enough drayage capacity in any of the local port markets or available many in all of the rail markets that would actually allow us to be able to convert all of that rail traffic that is currently sitting on trains and put that on truck. I think I've said it before, but intermodal trains can carry roughly the equivalent of about 280 trucks and remove those off the highway. So that capacity is it's an integral part of national supply chain. So the way to think about that is, and when we think about what that impact would have been, that means distribution centers are probably going to run out of inventory. All the construction sites that we're seeing popping up, even here in Chicago, all the highway, the construction, and the aggregates and materials that are going into those projects, all of that would have gradually come to a halt if the nation's rail infrastructure is not moving.
That bulk commodity point is a really good point that you bring up, Michael, because when we talk about a lot of who is most at stake for a rail shutdown, I think that we tend to forget the folks who rely on agriculture feed and fertilizer and those commodities that move on the rails like that. You've got companies like UP now making promises to farmers in California saying, we're going to improve our service standards, but how can they keep those promises if you've got this threat of a looming shutdown, right? And when we're talking about these people who are the main players in whether the intermodal shutdown happens or keeping traffic on the rails going, how much stake do those people who rely on those bulk commodities really play in the game? And is there any type of room for comment or room for discussion around those players and them making them needs known? That way there's more incentive to avoid the shutdown, I guess.
Yeah, actually, that's a really insightful question. I think the way that I've been framing it up and the way that I've been thinking about this is from some of the conversations that I've had with both shippers and some insiders at the rail operators, is that there is a sense that a deal will actually get done, because there's a looming sense that if an executive order is the way that this is all settled out, when you have a very engaged Surface Transportation Board and that regulatory body, you never know what will actually show up in the legislation. And so there is a concern that without a solid vetting process of having to move that through Congress, that something else shows up that may be less than desirable for the rail industry. And so in the situation where they have the opportunity to find common ground and to find a middle opportunity to collaborate, I think that there's a greater than not likelihood that we'll see some sort of activity on that side, mainly because the railroads have been painted for a very long time as not being shipper and labor focused. And I think this is a really unique opportunity for a reset on that narrative. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, you're exactly right. Union Pacific, BNSF, CP, all of the other rail operators, they play an integral role in the North American supply chain. And I think they know and want to believe that when you've got an environment where the crisis in Ukraine, the war with Russia, has literally taken off of the global table 30 to 40% of the grain supply. There's a massive opportunity to make sure that we can allow the agricultural producers in Canada and the United States to get their products to market. So I think it's a really unique opportunity for them to find the middle ground.
I would agree with everything you just said. Let's talk about the service that we have right now and some of the disruptions that are going on right now with chassis availability, warehouses full, can't bring back the chassis, et cetera. What's going on there?
Yeah, so interesting perspectives there. So a couple of the Western railroads saw their network velocity actually increase over the past couple of weeks. And then we've seen kind of a downturn in some areas. I think the way to think about that is you're going to have specific sections of the railroads that are performing really well or performing better than they have been in recent weeks. And I think there are some sections of the North American rail infrastructure that still need to get a handle on their labor availability and their crew availability. That is what ultimately is driving network processes right now. So when I think about how that backs into overall intermodal availability, even if all the trains were operating on time and the crane operators were fully staffed and we were ready to go and unload the trains upon arrival, the chassis situation that you've just called out is becoming so dire in inland markets. I was surprised at the number of chassis I saw here in Chicago yesterday, where you had a competing railroad's container on another competitor's chassis. And so I've seen that probably for the past couple of weeks, but saw it about 4 or 5 times yesterday. And I've just been really surprised that in a situation as dire as it is, they're now taking advantage of using whatever chassis is commercially available and executing that shipment just to get it out the gate. So I think really when I've thought about this, and we've talked about this many, many times, I think the ultimate solution for the chassis availability problem is really going to be somebody else coming into the system and providing more wheels to the greater community, because the reality is the chassis to container ratio is at a point and it's out of balance, and I don't think that we're going to see any relief on that through the back half of the year. And I think that we're going to see a strong continued push for consumer demand over the next 6 months.
Wow, so greater capacity on the chassis side is what you see as the relief. There's the ratios off there. So given all those things that we're talking about here, there's all kinds of different challenges, obviously, with the service and what is going on in the supply chain, particularly with the rail. I mean, it challenges throughout every mode. Are there points within this negotiation for this contract that would fix this or harm this, or is this the sticking ground merely over compensation and retaining employee heads?
Yeah, good question, Michael. I think that there's one thing that I think is a little bit unspoken and that folks are not talking about, at least very publicly. I think there is a broader concern about the reduction from going to a 2-person to a single-person crew. And I think that there are situations where that may be absolutely applicable, right? We have remote control locomotives that are operating in freight yards all across America and Canada and Mexico today. That's not unrealistic to think. I think the challenge is when you're thinking about taking the long haul opportunity of removing the 2-person crew and going down to 1 between maybe Los Angeles and Chicago, for example. I think that's going to be a very, very challenging uphill battle. And that is, I think, something that I think will either need to be addressed pretty aggressively, either through some financial incentives or just an agreement that that's not going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think once that's unblocked, I think that'll be a definitely helpful tailwind to the conversations. I think the other thing that I've really heard from a lot of union leaders is really about the expectation and requirements of an actual schedule, right? We all know that precision scheduled railroading was a theme for the past many years within the railroad industry. And that in and of itself is somewhat of an oxymoron, right? Railroads should run on schedules, and adding the precision moniker to it has kind of always been a head scratcher, at least for me. But if it is truly precise and it is truly scheduled, that means folks should be able to plan their lives outside of that. As the disruptions have gotten bigger and the train velocity has slowed down, people's work lives have been utterly disrupted for the past 3 years. And I think there are a lot of train and engine employees that are looking for a little more consistency in their work-life balance.
Harris, last question for you. We spoke with Joanna Marsh about this, who's been kind of our finger on the pulse here at FreightWaves, talking about the rail issues. And when it comes to resolving this, the federal oversight is something that is written into the law of how the railroads operate. And so that's just something that exists when it gets to this point, that's written into the laws. And I asked her if she thought that this could possibly set a precedent for federal oversight to look at managing other places in the transportation space when they get to this point with labor negotiations. Do you think that that could happen? And we see federal oversight now with rail. Do you think that we could eventually maybe see federal oversight with trucking if we got to that point? We know that they've got a little bit in the maritime side, but not too much up to the presidential level. But is that something that could be coming?
Yeah, that's an interesting forward-looking question. The legacy of freight rail regulation really extends back from the Interstate Commerce Commission, and so there is somewhat of a hangover effect of just a historical precedent that you mentioned around that. I think when we saw the deregulation of both trucking and rail was not able to kind of shake the ICC, and so the STB and the FRA are kind of those governing bodies, both for commercial activity and safety operations now. I think trucking is less likely to see that type of intervention, mainly because you have so much fragmentation in that space, so many independent owner-operators that are operating that there's not this larger risk of some sort of monopolistic activity, both from commercial operations or just simply execution, that could exist. And so I think that's less likely to see that in other modes. However, I think it's fair to say that if you have a certain consistency and a certain belief in the government that lasts for many, many, many generations, you could definitely see some sort of regulation coming back. But I think that's one of the good things about having an open democracy. We tend to see a shift in sentiment every couple of years.
Yeah, we definitely do. Harris, thank you so much for all your insights today. It's good to see you again, my friend, and we'll talk again real soon. We'll keep our eyes on the rail. Thank you, sir.
All right, we're going to head back over to Sydney Edwards for a look at what is making headlines on freightwaves.com.